Zara Tindall stood before the towering iron gates of the private royal chapel, expecting to grieve, not to be humiliated. But what unfolded in those chilling 2 minutes would leave even hardened palace aides stunned. A royal guard's subtle nod, a quiet word in the earpiece, then denied. Not even the Queen's beloved granddaughter was spared from this explosive act of exclusion. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The tension in the air was unmistakable as Zara approached the chapel grounds that morning. She wasn't flanked by photographers or burdened by any official capacity, just a granddaughter hoping to quietly pay her respects at a sacred family space. But the moment her vehicle stopped, the atmosphere turned ice cold. The royal guard, typically formal but polite, seemed tense. There was a pause, subtle but deliberate. Then a quiet murmur passed through the radios. The gates, which had opened without hesitation for others, remained shut. According to palace sources, orders had been handed down barely minutes before her arrival. Zara was not to be allowed entry. The command, chillingly vague, reportedly cited restricted access for senior working royals only. For Zara, who had shared an unbreakable bond with her grandmother, this was more than just a slight. It was a repudiation of her place in the family. Though she lacked a title, her closeness to the Queen had always been above protocol. But now, protocol had turned into a weapon. Witnesses described the moment as surreal. Zara didn't lash out. She didn't cry. She simply stood, stunned, as if trying to comprehend that even grief could now be politicized. One aide reportedly looked away, unwilling to meet her eyes. Another murmured an apology but no explanation. And just like that, the gates that once welcomed her with warmth were now the same that severed her from the legacy she held so dear. This wasn't just a denial, it was erasure, playing out in broad daylight, in front of the Queen's memory, and a family whose internal fractures were now impossible to hide. But who gave the order, and why now, of all times, on the Queen's sacred Memorial Day? Behind every locked door at the palace is a whisper, and those whispers have one name on their lips: Camilla. Since the Queen's passing, insiders claim the Queen Consort has been quietly redrawing the map of royal influence, and Zara's exile from the chapel may be the most chilling example yet. As the monarchy evolved into its next chapter under King Charles, Camilla moved with precision, slowly, subtly, but unmistakably carving out her own vision of what the royal family should look like. And in that vision, there was no room for sentiment. Only structure. Only hierarchy. Only control. Those who once floated within the margins of royal affection, cousins, grandchildren, loyal confidants, now found themselves outside the gate, both literally and symbolically. And no case was more glaring than that of Zara Phillips, the Queen's spirited granddaughter, who once shared private jokes and late-night phone calls with Her Majesty, but who now stood cut off from the very chapel where her grandmother's memory was being honoured. The clash between what Elizabeth had built and what Camilla was now enforcing couldn't have been starker. Zara, unlike many of her royal peers, had never craved the spotlight. She'd never carried a title, never insisted on royal treatment, never used her name to leverage power. And yet, within the Windsor walls, she was cherished. The Queen's fondness for Zara was no secret. Her laughter around her trust in her decision to allow Zara a life free from titles, precisely because she wanted to protect her from the very machinery now grinding her down. But Camilla never saw it that way. According to those close to the inner circle, Camilla has long viewed the extended family as a liability. Streamlining the monarchy wasn't just a slogan, it was a mission, and those not officially bound to the working royal core. Zara may have had royal DNA, but she didn't wear the crown, didn't wave on the balcony, didn't carry out duties in the king's name. And in Camilla's tightening framework, that made her irrelevant. But the rejection at the chapel wasn't just procedural, it was personal. Palace staff whisper that the timing was no coincidence, that Camilla's team had full knowledge of Zara's intent to attend the private memorial. It wasn't about space, one insider claimed. It was about message. The message that affection doesn't equal access. That closeness to the Queen doesn't guarantee respect under the new regime. And quietly, in hushed phone calls and whispered asides, other royal cousins have begun to speak out. The move didn't just isolate Zara, it exposed a fracture, deepening by the day, between Camilla and those who still carry the Queen's memory as a living legacy. Some have gone so far as to say the monarchy has become unrecognizable, drifting further from the matriarchal warmth Elizabeth once offered, and into the cold corridors of selective belonging. And yet, this wasn't just about titles or hierarchy, it was about loyalty, legacy, and one quiet promise made long ago. Before she was a public figure, Zara was just Lilibet's granddaughter. They shared secrets, laughter, and a bond built far from flashing cameras. But even that sacred connection couldn't shield her, not in today's monarchy. What would the Queen have said if she saw Zara turned away? The thought lingers like smoke in the air, heavy with grief and quiet fury. Behind palace gates, where titles dictate presence and protocol trumps emotion, Zara's rejection from the Queen's memorial didn't just bruise the heart, it fractured a legacy. This was not the fate Queen Elizabeth II would have imagined for the granddaughter who made her laugh on stormy days and steadied her through the loneliest stretches of reign. From the earliest days of Zara's childhood, it was the Queen, not an institution, who shaped her world. She was raised not just in royal circles, but in a cocoon of personal love, away from suffocating duties and relentless headlines. Elizabeth ensured that Zara was free to live, to choose, to breathe. She was the granddaughter who wasn't shackled by the crown but still carried its weight through character, not obligation. To the public, Zara may have seemed distanced from the throne, but within the family, her closeness to the Queen was unquestioned. It was Zara who could crack the Queen's famously unreadable demeanour with a quick remark. It was Zara who joined her on private holidays, galloped beside her through Balmoral's rugged trails, and shared stories no one else was privy to. Behind those guarded palace walls, their connection wasn't a performance, it was pure, unfiltered affection. Handwritten letters exchanged during long absences, thoughtful gifts that carried memory and meaning. Advice whispered over tea, not shouted through statements. These were the threads of their relationship, delicate, unpublicized, but deeply woven. And yet, it was this same woman, Elizabeth's laughter and legacy, who was stopped at the gate, unacknowledged by the monarchy her grandmother led for 70 years. The refusal to grant her access to the Queen's private memorial stung not just because of the rejection, but because it dishonoured the very intention Elizabeth had behind her choices. The Queen had deliberately withheld titles from Zara not as a slight, but as a shield. She wanted her granddaughter to be spared from the crushing weight of royal responsibility, to live a life of dignity without the constant glare of public scrutiny. Zara had taken that gift and honoured it quietly, building a life based not on pomp, but purpose. She embraced charity, raised a grounded family, and never once sought the spotlight. She didn't ask for power, she didn't seek privilege. And yet, when the time came to mourn the woman she loved most, she found herself locked out not by accident, but by a monarchy that seemed to be erasing the Queen's emotional legacy in favour of cold protocol. To many, watching from the outside, the symbolism couldn't be ignored. Zara was perhaps the most loved privately, but the most dismissed publicly. The very absence of a title, the thing meant to free her, had become the excuse to cast her aside. It was a bitter irony, and one that did not go unnoticed by other royals still grappling with the Queen's absence. What was once a family had become a structure, and in that structure, love held little weight. But the emotional fallout wasn't just Zara's, it sent shockwaves through the entire royal bloodline. When Mike Tindall got the call, something inside him snapped. The former rugby star wasn't used to palace games, but when his wife was publicly shunned, he stormed into Clarence's house with words that rattled the walls. And those close to him say, he didn't leave quietly. The moment Zara's voice cracked on the phone, describing what had just happened at the gates of the chapel, Mike's response was immediate. There was no measured diplomacy, no rehearsed press statement, only the raw, protective fury of a husband watching the woman he loves be humiliated by the institution that once embraced her. To the royal establishment, Mike had always been the outsider, charming, affable, but peripheral. That morning, he made sure no one forgot his presence again. Within hours, he was face to face with a senior aide inside Clarence's house, his voice raised, fists clenched, and his message searing. "Don't ever treat my wife like that again." Witnesses say the exchange was nothing short of explosive, with staff momentarily fearing it might escalate further. Mike had stayed silent for years, playing the part of the easygoing royal spouse, always on the fringes, but never over the line. But Zara's exclusion crossed that line in the most unforgivable way. It wasn't just an administrative oversight, it was a deeply personal insult, one that exposed just how cold and calculated the inner workings of the monarchy had become. Mike wasn't simply angry that Zara had been turned away. He was enraged by what it represented, the erasure of her legacy, her pain, her rightful place in the royal fabric. He reportedly demanded answers not from underlings, but from the very top, insisting on speaking with Prince William or King Charles directly. What followed was a panicked flurry of calls and behind-closed-doors meetings, as aides scrambled to contain a confrontation that had already begun to spiral beyond their control. According to palace sources, even security protocol was briefly escalated, fearing the confrontation might provoke an even broader scene. Mike, while not violent, was unrelenting, refusing to be placated by hollow reassurances or vague bureaucratic language. "You don't get to erase people," he reportedly told one staffer. "Not the people who mattered most to her." The silence that followed from the palace was deafening. No apology, no correction, no public clarification. Only a chilling, calculated pause, as if they hoped the story might disappear beneath the next headline. But Mike wasn't interested in staying quiet. And the fury he unleashed behind those palace walls wasn't just his own, it was the bottled rage of a family that had been pushed too far. But while Mike fumed in private, another royal was already mobilizing behind the scenes. Princess Anne has never been one for drama but cross her daughter, and she becomes unstoppable. What began as a slight against Zara became a full-blown royal standoff when Anne issued an ultimatum no one saw coming, and Charles was left scrambling to avoid public embarrassment. For decades, Anne built a reputation as the monarchy's unshakable force, a woman of action, not sentiment, whose loyalty to the crown was equaled only by her tireless work ethic. But in that moment, protocol collapsed beneath a mother's wrath. Zara's rejection from the Queen's memorial wasn't just an institutional decision, it was personal. And for Anne, it was the final straw. What had once simmered in private now boiled into confrontation. Gone was the dutiful royal. What stood in her place was a mother demanding answers, accountability, and respect, not for herself, but for the daughter who had been wronged. Behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace, Anne requested a private audience with King Charles. But this wasn't a polite exchange. It was a reckoning. She laid bare her fury, not in raised voice, but in the weight of her silence, the sharpness of her questions, and the resolve in her ultimatum. Those familiar with the meeting say she did not flinch. She reminded Charles that Zara had never asked for anything, not titles, not privileges, not recognition. Yet, in her most vulnerable moment, she had been discarded by the very system their mother once protected with such care. Anne made it clear this would not be brushed aside. She reportedly warned that unless the matter was addressed and rectified, she would begin withdrawing from certain royal engagements. To Anne, this wasn't about politics or press optics, it was about justice. It was about a family that had lost its soul in the pursuit of image. And at the center of it all was her daughter, humiliated not by accident, but by design. But Anne's fury didn't erupt in isolation. It was rooted in years of buried tension, especially with Camilla. The Queen Consort, once tolerated by Anne out of necessity, had grown into a rival presence within the royal structure. Camilla's influence had expanded quietly but steadily, and while Anne had always maintained public composure, those close to her say she never fully accepted Camilla's role as monarch-in-waiting. Now, with Zara's exclusion, the divide had turned into open warfare. Anne viewed the chapel debacle as more than a logistical failure. It was a message, one crafted in Camilla's language of hierarchy and detachment. And that message, Anne was determined to erase. Eventually, Charles issued a vague assurance that the chapel access protocols would be reviewed, a hollow phrase meant to soothe the press, not the pain. But the damage had already been done. A line had been drawn, and Anne stood firmly on one side with Zara. The palace may have hoped to downplay the storm, but Anne's defiance couldn't be ignored. Not when it came wrapped in principle, blood, and the unshakable loyalty of a mother who had lost her queen and now watched as her daughter was being slowly erased from the very legacy that belonged to her. But while the palace played damage control, another twist was already unfolding, one that would shake the royal bloodline to its core. Sealed in elegant stationery and tucked inside a mahogany drawer, a long-forgotten letter penned by Queen Elizabeth herself has resurfaced, and its contents could upend everything we thought we knew about her wishes for Zara, the monarchy, and who truly belongs. The discovery was accidental, almost poetic in its timing. A royal archivist, combing through the Queen's private collection for commemorative material, opened a drawer meant for classified correspondence, and there it was. Yellowed slightly with age, but unmistakably written in the Queen's crisp, deliberate hand. The envelope bore no formal seal, only the quiet intimacy of a message left for family, not for ceremony. Inside was a letter addressed to Charles, written during the Queen's final summer at Balmoral, and in it, she spoke not of power, not of titles, but of love, legacy, and one name that stood out above all, Zara. The line that has since sent ripples through palace corridors read simply, "Zara has my heart. Let her be where I rest." It was not a suggestion. It was a declaration. A grandmother's final wish laid bare in ink. The letter detailed the Queen's desire for Zara to always have access to her private memorials, not as a guest, but as family, regardless of official status or public role. Elizabeth, who had spent her life balancing duty with devotion, had chosen to place her trust in Zara as a keeper of her memory, not because of a title, but because of a bond. The revelation struck a deep, reverberating chord within the royal household. Because the rejection Zara faced at the chapel was now no longer a matter of protocol, it was a betrayal of the Queen's own words. Insiders are reportedly furious that the letter had not been honoured. Some whisper that it had been deliberately buried, pushed aside during the transition of power, deemed inconvenient for the new streamlined monarchy taking shape under Charles and Camilla. Others believe it was never intended to be seen until the Queen was gone, her voice replaced by silence, her wishes treated as optional rather than sacred. But now that the letter has come to light, that silence has been broken. Pressure is mounting within palace walls for King Charles to release the letter publicly, a move that could either mend the rift with Zara or ignite an even deeper crisis of trust. What makes this more haunting is the tone of the Queen's writing, gentle, reflective, but unyielding. It was not the voice of a sovereign, but of a grandmother ensuring her family would hold together when she no longer could. That voice, now risen from the grave, confronts the living with a moral dilemma. Charles, who once called Zara a light in his mother's life, must now decide whether to honour that light or dim it in favour of political expediency. The monarchy, built on tradition, finds itself cornered by legacy. And once again, at the heart of the storm, is a woman who never asked for power, but whose absence from that chapel now threatens to unravel the very idea of royal inheritance. But it wasn't just the Queen's voice rising from the grave. Another royal stepped forward, breaking ranks. In a move no one predicted, Prince Harry reached out to Zara directly, offering his voice, his platform, and his fury. The two had drifted in recent years, but this moment brought them back together. And what Harry said in his leaked message left everyone reeling. Long before the rift, long before Sussex titles and American interviews, Harry and Zara were thick as thieves, cousins bound by humour, rebellion, and their shared ability to see through the monarchy's illusions. But after Harry's explosive exit from royal life, that closeness fractured, buried beneath years of silence and unspoken hurt. So when the news broke that Zara had been barred from their grandmother's memorial, Harry's silence shattered, and behind the scenes, he made his move. Not with a press release, not with a staged photo, but with a message private, heartfelt, and furious. According to palace insiders, Harry's voice message to Zara was brief but powerful. He began by acknowledging the hurt she must have felt, how he, of all people, knew what it was like to be shut out by the very system you once trusted. And then came the line that ignited a media firestorm. You were always more royal than they ever deserved. The message was never meant for public ears. But within 48 hours, it had leaked, triggering an avalanche of headlines and plunging Buckingham Palace into yet another round of crisis management. Some say the leak came from someone close to Harry, hoping to draw attention to Zara's treatment. Others believe it was deliberate sabotage, designed to paint Harry as a disruptive force once more. Whatever the truth, the impact was undeniable. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about Zara. It was about the monarchy's brokenness, its cold calculations, and the growing number of voices speaking out against it. Meghan, too, played a quiet but unmistakable role. Though she stayed behind the scenes, sources say she encouraged Harry to reach out to Zara, reminding him that family is more than hierarchy, that sometimes it's about showing up when it matters most. Their intervention may not have healed every wound, but it reignited something long buried: solidarity, defiance, a refusal to be silenced. And as the letter from the Queen's desk collided with Harry's voice from across the ocean, the palace was caught off guard. They hadn't expected the Sussexes to get involved. They certainly hadn't expected them to strike a chord with the public. But suddenly, support for Zara began to swell, not just from within royal circles, but from a public that saw in her story something deeply relatable. Being left out by those who once claimed to love you. And with Harry's words echoing through every headline, the royal institution found itself once again on unstable ground, challenged not by scandal, but by truth. And as public sympathy for Zara surged, the palace made one final move, one that backfired spectacularly. The gates finally creaked open, but Zara Tindall never walked through them. In a decision that stunned the royal household, she refused the palace's olive branch and chose to honour the Queen her own way. A choice that echoed louder than any royal decree. The offer had come quietly, behind closed doors, and far too late. Palace aides reached out the following morning, extending a carefully worded invitation for Zara to return to the private chapel. It was meant to undo the damage, to show the world that family still meant something within those stone walls. But Zara didn't flinch. She didn't pause. Her response was swift and clear. "I won't walk through doors I wasn't welcome at." With those words, she turned the entire power structure on its head. Because this time, it wasn't the monarchy that made the statement, it was the one they had cast aside. Instead of returning to the scene of humiliation, Zara held a private vigil, quiet, dignified, and deeply personal. Surrounded by those who loved the Queen not for her title, but for her humanity, Zara paid tribute in her own way. There were no photo ops, no press coverage, no formal dress codes, just silence, reverence, and truth. As word of her refusal spread, the public reaction exploded. Social media erupted with messages of support. Justice for Zara began trending globally, driven by people who saw her not just as a royal, but as a daughter, a granddaughter, a woman standing tall in the face of cold indifference. For many, her rejection of the palace's late offer wasn't defiance, it was integrity. A symbolic rejection of a system that had lost its emotional compass. And with that one quiet act, something shifted. The divide that had once existed solely within the royal family now spilled into public consciousness. People began to question not just Zara's treatment, but the entire institution's values. Who gets honoured? Who gets erased? Who decides? In this new landscape, it was no longer the crown that commanded reverence, it was character. And Zara's character, forged in silence and sorrow, had become louder than any royal proclamation. She had chosen legacy over optics, meaning over protocol. But behind palace walls, one question still lingers, a question that could rewrite royal legacy. They say the palace doors close quietly, but what if one royal closes them from the outside? With everything that's happened, Insiders believe Zara is seriously considering the unthinkable, a full and permanent break from the monarchy. If she leaves, who else might follow? Within the palace, whispers have turned to worry. Behind the sharp expressions and polished statements lies a truth too dangerous to say aloud. Zara is done playing the part of the overlooked granddaughter. Sources close to the family suggest that conversations have already begun, not just about stepping back from royal-affiliated appearances, but about erasing the line altogether. She's weighing the cost of peace against the weight of legacy. And after the memorial debacle, after the buried letter, after the deafening silence from the crown, her answer may already be written. In private, Zara has reportedly told friends she no longer feels tied to the system her grandmother once carried with grace. She's tired of existing on the margins of a family that clings to image, while cutting ties with its own. And more than that, she wants her children raised in a world where love isn't conditional, where dignity isn't measured by who stands on a palace balcony. Talk of a potential move abroad has gained traction, with Australia and New Zealand floated as options, somewhere distant but familiar. Somewhere far enough to heal, yet close enough to remind the monarchy of what they lost. The most shocking development, however, is not Zara's rumoured departure, it's who might follow her. Princess Anne, the unwavering rock of the royal schedule, is said to be quietly aligned with her daughter's pain. Though Anne would never grandstand, her growing disillusionment with the monarchy's recent choices has become evident. If Zara walks, Anne's absence, however subtle, may follow. That possibility terrifies the palace more than they're willing to admit, because losing Zara would hurt the monarchy's image, but losing Anne would threaten its foundation. Public perception is shifting rapidly. What once felt like a fringe rebellion now feels like a reckoning. People aren't turning on tradition, they're turning on betrayal. The Queen's granddaughter was pushed away. The Queen's daughter may be next. And the monarchy, already battling waning relevance, now risks bleeding out its most loyal bloodline, not to scandal, not to tabloid drama, but to silence earned, intentional, and final. Zara's inner circle sums it up in one devastating sentence. She's not done speaking, just done being silenced. Zara's rejection from the chapel was never just about one day, it was the spark. And now, the fire is spreading. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.